Today is Saturday, May 25th, 2024. We are in Apalachicola, Florida. And my name is Donovan with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. My co-researcher is
Alexandra Leon.
And today we have the honor and pleasure of interviewing. Could you state your name?
Wallis. I'm Wallis Tinnie. I work with Florida Black Historical Research Project in Miami, Florida, and Palm Beach County, and Dade County, and Palm Beach County. And
yes. Can you tell me a little bit about what brought you here today?
Well, in Palm Beach County, every year we celebrate, or shall we say commemorate, the battle, so-called Seminole Battle at Loxahatchee River Battlefield Park between the Seminole Maroons and the U.S. military in 1838. A battle which ultimately led to their going on the so-called Trail of Tears to the west, to Oklahoma, Texas, and Mexico. And we honor those at that battle, both the military and the Seminole Maroons. In the meantime, in 1978, when I was a student at the University of Iowa, I learned about as a student of Jonathan Walton's in history, I learned about the Negro fort, and I learned about Fort Blount, and I learned about the Fort Mose, and I learned about the entire Seminole struggle in Florida. And at that point, although I wasn't a history major, my major was literature, I was wondering, why was this story not told? I read the book called Exiles of Florida. And Exiles of Florida by Joshua Giddings is a book that they try to disparage merely because he was an abolitionist. And of course, if you're an abolitionist, meaning you're one who wants to not have slavery. In other words, you want to have a population of free people and no enslaved people in your country. That was his era of the ways. So anyway, I read that book, Exiles of Florida, and wondered what was going on. In the meantime, my grandmother, whose name is Florence Ealer Jones Ham, was born on a Seminole, the Miccosukee Reservation. They called it a reservation, my family did, outside of Tallahassee, Florida. And so I grew up with her, and I grew up knowing her as a native, of someone of indigenous extraction, because you could look at her and see that she was somewhat different in that way, in the way that she looked like what we at that time called the Indians, which, the Hollywood version of people instead of indigenous or First Nation, as some people refer to them. But I knew that about my grandmother. So all of these factors together led to my knowledge. And when Mr. Thomas Mitchell told me that he was working with this project, I wanted to come up last year, but I was unable to get here. But this year we decided no matter, we would be here because this was something very important to us. And so far we have not been sorry at all. It has been very enlightening and very rewarding experience for us.
Yes, absolutely. We've also been excited to come here. Us at the University of Florida have never made it up to Negro Fort, and this is our first time coming here today, so we were really excited about that. Could you talk about maybe what you felt while you were at the site, or maybe what did you expect to find?
Yes,
or what did you learn?
I was amazed, really. Usually when I am in this kind of situation, I hate to say this, but people are going to disregard everything I say from this moment on, but I do have a tendency to be open to ancestral intervention. But this time today, only momentarily when I was speaking before the group did something come, but it went away quickly. It's almost as if they said, leave her alone, she has something to say. So I feel as if I was given the opportunity to freely explore the place without being overly, I don't know if you realize it, but when you're sitting here, all your ancestors, they're all around you. And they, and if they want to, they can, if you're open to it, or at least, not. I don't want you to not believe anything I say after this point, so I end my point on that point.
Okay. Well, if you want to speak more on that, I encourage you to. But we can move on if you'd rather do so. That being said, I want to ask about your grandmother. Is this your maternal or your paternal grandmother?
She was my father's mother.
Okay. Okay, and could you call her name once more?
Florence Ealer Jones Ham. She married James Ham from South Carolina. And she chose to be a black woman or to be in the black society.
Okay. I guess as someone who comes from, a native indigenous population in the region, how did it feel to, learn this history today?
Well, as I told you earlier, I'm a member of the Florida Black Historical Research Project. This organization was founded by my cousin, whose name is my late cousin, whose name was Issa Ham Bryant. Issa was born in Tampa, Florida, and came to live with my family. You know how they do with boys or with children. He came to live with my grandmother, Florence, and who was the sister of his grandmother. And they allowed him to come and live with them at the family home in West Palm Beach. And he set up this organization. He was a young man who was very much interested in his ancestry, both his Seminole ancestry and his African American ancestry. So that he founded things like the Afro Arts Festival in West Palm Beach. And he started this remembrance at Loxahatchee River Battlefield Park, which is held every year during the Martin Luther King weekend. He initiated that project among other historians and archaeologists who had discovered that Loxahatchee River battlefield, so now just this year received its status as a battlefield by the on the register, just received that status this year. But he worked on that before his death in 2007. And he worked every year to acknowledge the presence of what had been discovered by the archaeologists and the historians in that area. There is a lot I could tell you about Issa, which because he was an extraordinary young man in terms of his ability to command the respect of other people and to follow his dream, which was to bring together the people who had left that spot or their descendants. And he did. He, about 27 years ago, he held, or about, it will be 27 years in 2025, he arranged for the people who left that spot in Jupiter and were sent by Colonel Jessup to Oklahoma to come back, their descendants to come back, and their the children to come back to Palm Beach County. And they were welcomed by the Palm Beach County school system, by Palm Beach County. It was a wonderful event. And when he passed away in 2007, I was left with the responsibility, I suppose you would say, of continuing the legacy that he had started with the Florida Black Historical Research Project. And we've been doing that annually since that time. I and other family members who have helped in this reclamation. As a matter of fact, last year we had received from the National Trust for Historic Preservation a grant for $50,000 to bring back not only the people from Oklahoma, but people from the Bahamas. There were people who also went to Cuba, people who went to Mexico and Texas. And so we were able to get people from Florida, from other parts of Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, Mexico, and the Bahamas to come back to this event. It was a 5-day event. 2 days were at Palm Beach State College in Palm Beach Gardens, and 2 days were at the park itself at Loxahatchee River Battlefield Park. And the 1 day was, we did a tour that carried us to some of the sites we feel that were significant historical sites in the area.
That's absolutely amazing. I love and I'm grateful that you were able to initiate that return for those descendants and for those families to Palm Beach and their ancestral home. That's absolutely amazing. I want to ask if you've ever returned to the quote-unquote reservation that your grandmother was born at?
No, we're planning to go there before we leave the area. We're planning to go to that area. I just want to see it, be there.
That's amazing. Could you share something that maybe you learned while we were touring the site at Negro Fort today that you didn't know before?
Well, actually, I didn't exactly learn things, but what they presented with the ground X-rays, what do they call it?
Yeah,
ground
radar.
Radar. I thought was fascinating because we had been doing the same thing down in, my husband was in a project in Key West, and they did that same thing to discover where the burials of the Africans who had been rescued from some ships carrying Africans from Africa after the slave trade had been effectively ended. And so they were, brought to Key West, and there were like 3 ships, and some of the people died there as a result of their harrowing trip and the conditions they just couldn't survive. So there were like 1,200 people, and of that number, about, I don't know, 300 or 400 of them died there in Key West. So they were buried in the area of Higgs Beach, and they were able, through that kind of radar, to see where the bodies were. It's incredible, and where they lay, and some of them were, small kids, and most of them were kids, actually. But anyway, I had seen that kind of thing used before, but it was amazing to see them use it in this manner here to validate or to kind of give even more credibility to the story of those people who were massacred, those 300 people at Fort, at that site, Prospect Bluff.
Yes, Alex.
I wanted to ask what it was like working with Mr. Mitchell, especially on this project, and learning about the site that we visited today.
Well, it's interesting working with Mr. Mitchell because he does so many things. He's so involved with so many things. And he has a certain kind of knowledge that is really, really enticing. And he has an incredible understanding of what we need to do to kind of begin to make the story that is, kind of in the recesses of our history, kind of come alive for this current generation. I like that. I enjoy working with him.
Yeah, I like that too. It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Following up, I know you said that you work in like the Miami-Dade and Palm Beach County areas. How does, the impact and the energy from working with Mr. Mitchell and yourself, carrying on even like your cousin's legacy, how has that shown up in the South Florida area? I'm thinking like maybe even education, or it could be anything really.
Well, that's a good question. And the reason that it's a good question is that we were just talking in the back about how are we going to get young people to really know and care about this history. What can we do to, and so one of the responses was, of course, we could do some kind of digital thing that young people, that would, attract their attention. But, I do think that young people are going to have to, as far as I can see, young people are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. Not only are they smarter, but they are, I remember when I was a young girl, I wanted to be a lawyer so that I could help people, and I could, do all kinds of things. And I think young people are the same, they feel the same way I felt. And I think that they are open and ready. They do not need the knowledge to be, they just need to know it. And I think they are beginning to know this knowledge. They're beginning to find out through their little YouTube things and whatever these crazy things are, that TikTok that they don't do, or I don't know. All of the young things that young people do, and they're gonna know. I have so much faith that young people are going to grab these stories, grab their history, understand where they are. We may end up not liking what happens in the next couple of years, but I think we're going to have on our hands some really smart young people, regardless of the fact that some people are trying to keep them uneducated. They're going to educate themselves because it's there for them now on the internet. They can educate them. They don't even have to go to school if they don't want to. They can educate themselves, and if it's wrong education, they can go and find out that it's not right. Because they know how to go to the libraries, they are learning so many things and realizing so many things that we didn't when we were young people. They have so much at their fingertips that they can find out about. Even if it's erroneous information, they can, especially don't get any information from AI. It could be erroneous. That's another thing, it's another problem. But anyway, I have a lot of faith in young people, and I do think we need to understand that they're smart enough to catch on.
I agree. I think that's a great way to put it, and a lot of hope for the future.
Yes.
So kind of on that idea, what are some maybe key themes or ideas or perhaps stories that you would want, let's say, the next generation of Floridians, they need to know maybe these three things about maybe the Loxahatchee River, or maybe about Negro Fort, or maybe about, Andros Island in the Bahamas, or what are some key things that you want to be sure that the next generation knows about?
Well, I think that's such a wonderful question. I would say the first key thing that I would like to get across to young people is that they need to be aware of the language they use, of the language of history, of the language of, they need to recognize that our language has a legal canopy on it, a sacred canopy on it, a racist canopy on it, so that all the words we use are going to be informed by either religion, the sacred canopy, or by law, whether we can go to jail or not for saying it or doing it. It's going to be informed by racism because the whole society was built on racism. This entire Europe, this whole 500-year thing was built on a very racist thing of get rid of the Native Americans, get rid of use them for enslave the Africans, enslave the Native Americans, and then justifying this either biblically or through whatever way, you want to justify. They're barbarians, they're not human, they're just before human, all kinds of stuff that people knew weren't true. But the language, all of this informs the words that people use and how they use the words. So that what I want young people to be aware of is that the language has all kinds of little dangling, terrible things attached to it. They have got to learn how to remove those things and make sure that the language they use. For example, a lot of people have no difficulty, and I noticed in the exhibit downstairs, the use of the term runaway. Now, why would you use the term runaway to talk about somebody who absolutely did the heroic act of rescuing himself out of an enslaved environment and to take himself at the point of death that he could be killed by anybody in the community, had the right to kill him or stop him from freeing himself from enslavement. That's a very heroic act, and to also free his family. So then you're going to end up calling that runaway. And not to make it, then you're going to call it a runaway slave. Hello, if you have freed yourself, you're no longer enslaved. So, like the term slave itself, it's a commercial term. We shouldn't be using that term to refer to the people unless we're using it as a commercial term. But we shouldn't be calling people runaway slaves or slaves. The slaves did this and the slaves did that. Give me a break. How can we say we're speaking objectively about anything if we're using non-objective language? To call a person who was an African, of African descent, Native American descent, Euro-American, which, by the way, at the end of a period of enslavement, you do realize that in the Upper South, particularly, most of the enslaved people were quite white-looking, a lot of them. What does that mean? That slavery was used to define your position in society. It didn't have anything to do with the color of your skin, because many of the enslaved people at the point of, at 1865 or 1863, whenever you use that, whatever term, whenever year, when the war ended in 1865, there were quite a few white people enslaved in the United States, which is something that isn't discussed much, just like this fort is not, this Negro fort is not discussed. And the fact that we had all these black communities in Florida is not discussed. But these things are conveniently forgotten. But there were quite a few. You can read Joel Williamson's histories of the South about new people. He has a book called New People, Miscegenation in America, or something like that. And you can read other people. And you realize that there were quite a few people who were easily white people who were enslaved in America at the time that, because after the slave trade became illegal in about 1808 or whenever it was, they began to make their own slaves. And people, when you say this, people don't believe, but it's true. They did. They began to make their own slaves. This is in the history books. I'm not making this up. And they made their own slaves. So what do you think their slaves are going to look like? Them. Hello. And indeed, there were quite a few people who looked like them, who were enslaved for years in this country. But most people think slavery was a black-skinned phenomenon, which in fact it was not necessarily. What else? Oh, my second thing, there were three things. Language is one of the first things that I would want them to know. The second thing that would be important to me that they would take away is that Florida was a haven for freedom after the European assault on Florida began in when Columbus came, of course. And so there were several different groups of Native American people in Florida, several different what they called tribes of First Nation people in Florida, like I would say maybe 20 different kinds of people. Most of those people were either killed off, sold off, run off, and at some point, it's hard to say how many people were here, but I would like for them to know that in the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, which was about over 200 years that Florida was a state where freedom was enjoyed among Native Americans, African Americans, and Euro Americans, that whoever wanted to come here and live and make a life of themselves, they did, even among the people who were here, until the Europeans decided they wanted Florida. The Americans decided they wanted Florida. And then the English decided to use the people to try to make their case for bringing America back under their control. But that's a long story, but that's another thing I would like for them to remember. And the third thing I would like them to know is that I think that we need to recognize the I don't want to sound like go back, but I wish they could recognize that there was something to be learned from the lifestyles of how Native American people use the landscape. I would like for them to go back and understand a little more about how they loved and used and appreciated the landscape of Florida.
And what about this sort of relationship with the land you admire? Could you give
Relationship with
the land you admire? Could you give an example of maybe a practice or a certain?
Yes. I think that it's a kind of it has to do with, when I was a child, I used to sit on my porch in West Palm Beach, Florida, and I would watch the birds. There would be like thousands of birds. They would be dark. It would be dark. The sky would be dark with all these birds. And I would wait for the end. I would just sit there waiting to see the end of this flight of all these birds. I wouldn't see it. I wouldn't see the end of the birds. But now there are no birds flying south. I don't even see any birds flying south. And it has to do with the landscape and with what we've done. Like Mr. Mitchell told a story today about when he was a kid, his family would send him down here to Florida to, because he lived up in the north somewhere, And so they would send him down here, and that one time he said he was a little boy, and they took off all his clothes and put him outside, and all these mosquitoes just ate him up. And he had all these, looked like chicken pox all over his body. He says, but now when he comes, he never has problems with mosquitoes that other people have. He never from that point on had a problem with a mosquito. That knowledge of how to live in the environment that you are in. They put him out there so that he could experience that and not have to worry ever again about a mosquito. I mean, I don't know that that's the way I would want to learn about it, but I think it's a good thing to know that you could try one-time misery and never have to worry about that again in life, because those mosquitoes are real. Because nobody did that for me when I was a kid, and they bother me. They really do. But I do think that the landscape, that what we can learn from them and how they were able to to use the landscape and to be a part of the landscape and to just live. It's just something that I think would help us all. Because this what we're doing now cannot continue. It cannot continue. We're going to have to figure out something else, because in Miami they have built, like if this is a block, they have a building everywhere. You see something on this, they have a building, a tall building. I mean, a really tall building. And that's not going to last. That's not going to last. I'm sorry, but that is not going to be the way of the future.
Yeah, I agree completely. Is there anything or Alex, do you have any questions? Okay. Is there anything else you want to say before we end this interview?
No.
Okay, well, I have actually one more question, and it's back to your grandmother yet again. Well, I guess when was the last time you got to see her or meet her or speak with her?
When was the last time I got to see her? Strange that you should ask that question. I don't know when the last time was that I got to see her, because my last memory of her was when my other grandmother died, my mother's mother, and they sent all the children over to her house to sleep. To my father's grandmother's house to sleep, and so my memory is of her telling me that my other grandmother had died. And it's kind of a strange memory. And that's my memory, that's my last memory. And I know, we did a lot of things together. We played cards together. She talked to me about her quilting. She used to have this big quilting thing in her room, and she would tell me about how, what she was doing. She used to have the women who were wearing the native outfits that would come and sit on her porch and leave their huckleberries underneath the porch and leave those huckleberries, But that's my last memory. I don't even remember, and that's really strange. It's such a strange question you ask, but that is the memory that stays with me as the last thing I can remember, even though I remember other things like her, when she cooked and how she did and blah, blah, blah. How she wouldn't cook. They bought her a gas stove and she wouldn't use only her wooden stove, and she just absolutely refused to use this big, beautiful stove they bought her. She wouldn't use it. She had a wood stove, and that's how she cooked.
Wow.
But, no.
And is there anything, I know you're planning to go back, before you go back to Miami, you want to go back to, I guess, the place where she's from. Is there anything
Yes. That's where we want to go, yes.
Is there maybe
Miccosukee.
Yeah, Miccosukee, okay.
Yes.
Is there anything you would want maybe to tell her or to say to her while you're there? You don't have to share if you don't want to, but.
Yes, ask her to thank her. I would like to thank her for what she did. She was a very strong woman. Women, I don't know, but it takes a lot to do some of the things that I understand she and her sister did, to have the kind of life that she gave to my father and his siblings.
That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say before we end our interview today? Thank you so much for
I want to thank you so much for asking me to come here and to share this story of our family and my journey.
Of course. Well, thank you for sharing with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Okay, yes, and I also meant to mention that I'm wearing a cap that I got at the Seminole Canyon in Del Rio, Texas. Seminole Canyon is the place where the so-called Negro scouts, the ones who were used by the government to help them in the struggle to remove Native American presence in that area. And we were fortunate to go to each year the SISCA, which is a Seminole Indian Scouts Association, has an event in September in which they honor the ancestors of that period. And my husband and I went there, and they took us down into Seminole Canyon. And this hat is one of the designs from the canyon. And I bought the hat there because they said we needed a hat, and I didn't have a hat. And I did want to say that if you ever get an opportunity to go down, that's a wonderful experience, to go to Bracketville, Texas, and go to that event that they have annually, and go to Seminole Canyon. And because it is where the Seminoles, it is said, used to hide out underneath. That was their hide, but it's an incredible space. And I think anybody who is in the field you're in would love to go there and experience that.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing.
Okay, thank you.